Hi, my name is Raymond, and I'm a jazz trumpet player, composer, and recording artist. And I'm also the jazz trumpet professor at the Jacobs School of Music at Indiana University. And I want to welcome you to this masterclass being put on by ITG's event called Listen and Learn. This is such a cool thing that ITG is putting together. It's really a labor of love, in the midst of this global pandemic that we're all in, just giving us all an opportunity to be inspired and to learn and to grow. And I'm really honored to be a part of it. So thank you to everybody at ITG. I want to talk a little bit about how to go about practicing improvisation. And to me, this is one of the most asked topics and questions that I get from both my students at Indiana University, as well as students that I meet all around the world at master classes or residencies that I do. And I think it's such a common topic of discussion because it seems that most trumpet players do one of two things when they go about practicing improvisation. They either just turn on a backing track or a play-along recording and just play without any structure or intentionality or purpose. Or they kind of go the extra mile and transcribe some things from some of their favorite players, get a bunch of licks together, but then they feel like they can't develop their own voice as a player because they're just stuck with all these licks that they know. They don't know how they all fit together and work together in a musical way. And so what I want to do is just take a couple minutes here and tell you about a couple of things that I've learned along the way over the last 10 or 15 years of my career, as well as things that I teach my students now. And I hope this stuff can be beneficial to you and make your time practicing improvisation as effective and honestly as fun as possible. I think as we're going about talking about improvisation, the first thing that is sort of the foundation for knowing how to improvise is we have to know the language of the music, right? It's essential for jazz musicians to know that. Just like a baby would learn to speak by imitating their parents over and over and over and over again for years and years before they can form, coherent sentences and phrases and eventually speak eloquently and develop their own style of speaking. It's the same process for jazz musicians of how we go about learning this music and how to improvise. And so if you feel like you don't have a great foundation with the language that comes from jazz music and comes from Black American music, then your first priority is to get that language, to copy and imitate what you hear so that you can start to speak that yourself. And I tell students generally 3 or 4 things that I think are really important to think about when you're transcribing. One is I really recommend to learn and transcribe solos by ear. And to do this, you really have to focus. You really have to concentrate on exactly what's being played at that given time. You also have to remember so much of what's happening in the solo as you go about playing it, rather than going and writing it down first and then looking off of a piece of paper of what that solo is. You have to get it in your ear, right? And that's the best way to go about it. So once you get all the notes and rhythms from a solo that you transcribe, the next step is you have to go the extra mile by imitating all of the nuances that these players play with, right? You have to imitate their articulation. You have to imitate their sound, their dynamics, how they phrase. You have to imitate their inflections that they put on different notes, right? All of these things are the equivalent of you learning the accent of a language, right? You can learn the phonetics of a language of how, a word is spelled or how something is said, but if you don't hear exactly that accent and that nuance in the language, you're not going to sound like you can actually speak the language. So that's essential, right? Now, when you've done those things, the next most important things to do when you're working on transcribing something and specifically how to apply it to your own playing is take ideas from that solo and put it through all the keys and figure out all the permutations of how you can play those different ideas, right? This is going to not only give you incredible versatility on the horn to be able to hear these things in different keys, but it's just going to help you internalize these ideas and help them become an actual part of your language, right? And the other really important thing in order to do that, actually, maybe the step before that would actually be to learn the tune that the solo goes to, right? This is super important because if you don't know the context of what the person that you've transcribed is playing over, then you don't know how to apply it yourself, right? So the first things first is you want to transcribe the chords to the song and the form to the song, right? The harmony and the form. And I, again, would recommend doing this not by looking at a lead sheet, but do it by ear, right? Listen to the bass player, listen to the piano player, figure out what the form is, figure out where the chords move, and sort of use your theory mind as sort of a navigator to help you kind of find your way and piece together what those chords are. And then if you want to check it for reference with a lead sheet later, that's totally cool, right? All of these things are super essential to establishing a sense of foundation speaking the jazz language, right? But if you've done all this and you're still feeling like you haven't developed a voice that is yours on your instrument and playing this music, there are some specific ways I think we can go about working on improvisation that I think work really, really well. And really, I'm just taking a cue here for how to work on these by how we go about practicing trumpet, right? We isolate certain elements of our playing, like sound by doing long tones, or maybe technique by doing something like Clark studies, or flexibility by doing something like Schlossberg exercises, or whatever it may be. We work on all these different components of our playing to eventually then be able to have the facility on the instrument to be able to put it all together when we make music, right? And I think when we work on improvisation, we can actually do the same thing, and it helps us develop a sense of depth with what we're playing, right? So I like to practice kind of splitting my time up between three different categories. These are like the main three categories of music, right? Melody, harmony, and rhythm. And if we split our practice up and isolate each of these different things, what can actually happen is you develop a sense of depth within each of them so that you develop your own personal style, right? So first, let's actually talk about rhythm first. We'll talk about the last one. And I say that because I think most people probably forsake working on time feel, articulation, all that stuff in favor of working on licks and working on harmony and things that sound cool, right? But if you don't actually get the feeling of the music, you're not going to sound like a jazz trumpet player, no matter how many cool licks that you know, right? So the most important thing to do is to work on your time feel. And to me, there's a couple specific ways that I go about working on this. One is just to play along with records and try to, for one, imitate the trumpet players that I'm listening to on these recordings, right? To try to imitate where their time feel is. Where is their beat? Are they on the beat? Are they ahead of the beat? Are they behind the beat, right? Find where that beat is in that pulse and just try to articulate eighth note lines with them. You don't have to transcribe exactly what they're playing just to get the feeling of what they're doing, right? And the other thing that I really like to do here is, instead of paying attention to the trumpet player, pay attention to the drummer. Pay attention to the ride cymbal and the bass, right? That's giving you the quarter note. And if you can line up the quarter note, that is everything, right? That's going to establish a sense of pulse and a sense of beat, which is going to then inform your articulation. And it's then going to inform how you actually are able to develop a swing feel, right? Or just a jazz feel in general, right? And another really great exercise that I like to do to isolate rhythm, which is really easy, I call it like a one-note exercise. And so you essentially take a tune that you're working on, and instead of playing the chords or playing, improvising to the chords and the harmonic progressions of the song, you stay on one note. And the whole purpose of the exercise is to try to develop something rhythmically with this one note. So you're stripping away melody, you're stripping away harmony, all you got is rhythm, and you got to make something feel good, and you got to make something interesting out of it, right? So, for example, if I were to take a tune like All the Things You Are, for example, and do this, I'm not going to play the changes, but I'm going to give you an example for what it could sound like to do this with one note, okay? 1, 2, You get into all these different ways of just being able to play one note in a way that not only feels good, but is rhythmically interesting, right? That's just another simple little exercise that you can do to isolate the rhythmic aspect of improvisation. Now let's go to melody, okay? And this is an area where I think a lot of trumpet players get hung up. And again, I think it goes back to this idea of you learn a bunch of licks and you try to go then play that in the music and you try to insert all these licks and it doesn't work. It doesn't sound good, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't have like a soulfulness to it, right? And that soulfulness in melodic playing, to me, comes from being a master at being able to produce kind of like a call and response in your own phrasing, right? So again, take a tune that you know and that you're working on and play a phrase, play a simple melody, and then instead of just playing a lick that fits over the next set of chord changes that you're on, play something that answers that melody, and then play something that answers that. So you're always thinking kind of objectively of like what would work and what would sound best next, right? And this immediately gets you out of any sort of like lick-based playing because you're forced to think and hear melodically through the changes, right? So something like this. I'll do it on All the Things You Are again. Ready? 1, 2. Right? So I'm not really thinking licks at all, right? I'm just trying to connect with what I hear over the chord changes, right? And another great way to work on this, probably the ultimate way, in all honesty, is just to sing and play, back and forth, right? Practice trading 8s or 16s or choruses with yourself, singing, and then answer yourself on the trumpet. And try to get to the point where you feel like you can't even tell the difference if you're singing or playing, right? So again, I'll try to demonstrate that. Something like this. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, do da, dee da do do da, dee da, da do da be da do da ba do boo. Something like that. And like I said, you want to get to the point where you can't even tell if you're singing or playing. And if you can develop that intimate of a connection with your instrument, where you just play what you hear, you're going to be an incredible melodicist when you improvise, right? Okay, last but not least, let's talk about harmony for a second. There are a bunch of different ways that you can work on harmony and isolate this aspect of improvisation. Here are 2 ways that I really like. One is just take any chord that you're working on that's a part of the tune that you're playing, right? And isolate that one chord and just try to play as much stuff as you can over that one chord, okay? So start simple and then gradually see if you can get more complex while still being able to hear that chord in your head and to be able to play it functionally so that you're really, outlining what that chord sounds like, right? Something like this. 2, Actually, I'll explain this. I'm going to play over the first chord, the G minor 7, concert F minor 7. Okay, there we go. basically kind of work on being able to play really inside, right? And then gradually kind of go more outside and get a little more harmonically complex on just one chord. And you can do that for any kind of chord, right? Another great way that I like to work on this is do the same kind of thing, but over a chord progression, right? So probably the most common one would be like a 2-5-1 progression. And just try to isolate a certain 2-5-1 in the tune that you're working on, right? And try to find as many different ways to get around that sound as possible, right? And again, start simple, start really inside melodically and harmonically, and then see if you can gradually get more complex and go more outside, right? A great way to work on this especially is to work on this in keys that are unfamiliar to you. And this tune, second half of the bridge, most people feel really good up until that point, and then they get to that 2-5-1 in R F sharp major and everybody kind of freezes, right? So maybe isolate that for a bit and just try to get around that and develop some fluency with that 2-5, right? So here's what that would sound like. Just get more fluent in keys that aren't as easy for you, and that's a great way to just work on improvisation. And it develops your dexterity in all keys, and thus you're going to be able to play anything you hear, right? That's the goal. So I hope this has all been helpful for you, and I do want to put a really super shameless plug for something exciting for me that's coming up. I'm releasing a new book in a couple weeks called The Jazz Trumpet Routine. Fundamentals for the Creative Improviser. And it's essentially a book exploring a way to rethink playing fundamental exercises from kind of an improvising headspace and as a jazz trumpet player. So check it out. I think you'll really enjoy it. And thanks again to everybody here at ITG for making this happen. We are so grateful for this opportunity to learn and be inspired, and I hope to connect with all of you soon. Thanks so much.